The snow fell in lazy spirals outside the reinforced windows of Detention Center Alpha 7, each flake a tiny mockery of freedom. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his face against the cold transparasteel, watching the artificial winter that the Zalani had programmed to torment their human prisoners. Everything here was designed to remind them of what they'd lost. 3 months. 3 months since the fall of New Geneva Colony.
Another day
Marcus still
in
couldn't
paradise.
shake the image of burning Christmas trees from his mind. The Zalani had a particular hatred for human holidays, viewing them as dangerous expressions of hope and unity. When they conquered a world, the first thing they did was eliminate anything that might inspire resistance. "Another day in paradise," muttered Corporal Sarah Kim from her bunk. The medical officer had lost her arm during the final battle, and the Zalani had deliberately given her a prosthetic that malfunctioned whenever she tried to help someone. Even their mercy was cruel. Marcus turned from the window, surveying their shared cell. 23 human soldiers, all that remained of the New Geneva Defense Force. They'd fought for 72 hours straight before the orbital bombardment made resistance pointless. The Zalani could have executed them, but they preferred psychological warfare. Break the spirit, and you break the species. The cell door hissed open, and Commander Vexthal entered with his usual escort of 4 guards. The Zalani officer stood 7 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. His compound eyes shifted colors as he spoke, a sign of barely contained disgust. "Humans," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "Today you will be relocated to work detail in Sector 12. There has been an incident." Marcus stepped forward, drawing the alien's attention. As the highest-ranking officer still breathing, leadership had fallen to him by default. "What kind of incident?" Vexthal's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was equivalent to a smile. "The Kytherian children in the youth re-education facility have become unmanageable. They refuse to work, they refuse to eat, and they've begun asking questions about certain human customs they overheard from previous prisoners." The humans exchanged glances. The Kytherians were one of the dozen species the Zalani had conquered before setting their sights on humanity. They looked almost human, except for their pointed ears and silver eyes that seemed to hold starlight. Most importantly, their children aged slowly, staying in a childlike state for nearly 50 standard years. "What kind of questions?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. "They wished to know about someone called Santa Claus." The way Vexthal pronounced the name made it sound like profanity. Apparently, a human prisoner filled their heads with nonsense about a mythical figure who brings gifts to children. They now refuse to believe he isn't real. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. After months of hopelessness, after watching his world burn and his people break, these alien children had somehow preserved a piece of human magic. "And you want us to convince them otherwise?" "I want you to make them understand that fairy tales are lies," Vexthal hissed. "That hope is a poison that will only bring them pain. You will tell them the truth, that Santa Claus is not real, that no one is coming to save them, and that their only salvation lies in serving the Zalani Empire." The alien commander leaned closer, his chemical scent burning Marcus's nostrils. "Succeed, and your rations will be increased. Fail, and the children will be transferred to the processing centers." Everyone in the cell knew what that meant. The processing centers were where the Zalani broke minds beyond repair, turning sentient beings into mindless drones. It was a fate worse than death. "We'll do it," Marcus said quickly, ignoring the shocked looks from his soldiers. Vexthal's color shifted to satisfied orange. "Excellent. You leave in 1 hour." After the aliens departed, the cell erupted in angry whispers. "Marcus, you can't be serious," Kim protested. Those children are going to die if we don't help them," Marcus interrupted. "But we're not going to crush their hopes. We're going to do something else entirely." Private Johnson, barely 19 and still believing in miracles despite everything they'd endured, leaned forward eagerly. "What are you thinking, Sarge?" Marcus looked around the cell at his fellow prisoners. They were broken, beaten, and barely surviving. But they were still human. And humans had one particular trait that had carried them through every dark chapter of their history. I'm thinking, Marcus said slowly, that it's almost Christmas. The transport ride to Sector 12 gave Marcus time to think. The Zelani vehicle moved silently through the industrial wasteland that had once been New Geneva's capital city. Massive factories pumped out smoke while alien overseers directed human labor crews. It was efficient, soulless, and exactly what the Zelani wanted for every world they conquered. Sector 12 sat on the outskirts of the city, a collection of gray buildings surrounded by energy barriers. The youth re-education facility looked like every other Zelani structure, functional, intimidating, and designed to crush the spirit. As their transport approached the gates, Marcus could see small faces pressed against barred windows. "Remember," he whispered to his squad, "we're here to help those children, not hurt them." The facility's interior was even worse than Marcus had imagined. The walls were painted in drab colors scientifically proven to induce depression, and the air recycling system had been modified to remove any sense that might trigger positive memories. It was psychological warfare refined to an art form. Warden Clickstar met them at the entrance. Unlike Commander Vexthal, this Zelani was smaller and more insectoid, with rapid movements that suggested nervous energy. Finally, he clicked. These younglings have been impossible to manage. They sing strange songs, they refuse to follow schedules, and they've somehow convinced 3 other species to join their rebellion. He led them through sterile corridors lined with cell doors. They claim that someone named Santa will come for them. They've even fashioned crude decorations from scraps of cloth and food containers. It's disgusting. They stopped outside a large common room where the sound of voices could be heard through the heavy door. Marcus peered through the observation window and felt his heart break. Dozens of alien children sat in a circle, most no bigger than human 8-year-olds despite being decades old. They wore simple gray uniforms, but someone had managed to weave colored threads into patterns on the fabric. Makeshift garlands hung from the ceiling, and in the center of the room stood the saddest excuse for a Christmas tree Marcus had ever seen. It was constructed from bent metal scraps and torn fabric, but the children had decorated it with such care that it almost seemed beautiful. Paper stars cut from food packaging hung from improvised branches, and, at the top, a crude angel made from bandages watched over them all. "You see?" Clickstar gestured dismissively. "This is what happens when children are exposed to human imagination. They create elaborate fantasies rather than accepting reality." One of the children, a small Kytherian girl with brilliant silver eyes, was standing in front of the tree telling a story. Her voice carried through the door, clear and determined despite her obvious fear. "Santa will come," she insisted to the others. "The human prisoner told us so. He said Santa comes for all children who believe, no matter where they are." A larger child, one of the reptilian Essecatar species, shook his head sadly. "But, Mira, the guards say Santa isn't real. They say it's just a lie humans tell to make children behave." The little girl's eyes flashed with defiance. "Then, why are the guards so afraid of him? Why do they get angry when we talk about him? If he's not real, why does it matter?" Marcus felt a surge of pride. These children understood something the Zelani didn't. Hope wasn't just a feeling, it was a weapon. "You will enter now," Clickstar ordered. "Tell them the truth, and end this foolishness once and for all." The door slid open, and 23 human soldiers walked into a room full of alien children who looked up at them with a mixture of hope and terror. Marcus stepped forward, acutely aware that his next words would either save these young lives or destroy their spirits forever. The children stared at him with wide eyes, waiting for him to speak. Behind him, he could hear Clickstar and his guards settling in to watch the show. On the security cameras, he knew Commander Vexthal and other officials were also watching, waiting to see human soldiers crush the dreams of innocent children. Marcus looked at the little Kytherian girl named Mira, who clutched a small doll made from rags. Her silver eyes held such hope, such desperate faith, that he felt ashamed for every moment he doubted his own humanity. "Children," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent room. "My name is Marcus. These are my friends. We're here because you've been asking about Santa Claus." A ripple of whispers went through the group. Some of the children looked excited, while others appeared frightened. They'd been punished for asking these questions before. The guards say he isn't real, said the young Isekatar, his forked tongue flicking nervously. They say humans made him up to trick children. Marcus nodded slowly. I know what the guards say. But, let me ask you something. Do you know what Christmas is? More whispers, then, Mira raised her hand tentatively. The human prisoner said it's when Santa brings gifts to children. But, only if they're good. That's part of it, Marcus agreed. But, Christmas is about more than gifts. It's about hope. It's about believing that even in the darkest times, light can find a way through. It's about the idea that somewhere in the universe, someone cares enough about children to make sure they're not forgotten. Behind him, he heard one of the guards shifting impatiently. They were expecting him to destroy the myth, not explain it. Marcus knelt down to Myra's level, speaking directly to her while the others listened. The guards say Santa isn't real because they don't understand what real means. They think real means you can touch something, see it, prove it exists. But, you're smarter than that, aren't you? The little girl nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. Tell me, Marcus continued, is love real? Yes, she whispered. Can you touch it? Can you put it in a box and show it to someone? She shook her head. But, you know it's real because you can feel it. Because it changes things. Because when someone loves you, the whole world looks different. Marcus glanced around the room at all the children. Hope is like that too. And, kindness. And, the promise that someone, somewhere, cares about children like you. One of the guards stepped forward. Enough. Tell them Santa Claus is not real. Marcus stood up, turning to face the alien guard with steel in his voice. You're right. Santa Claus, the fat man in the red suit who lives at the North Pole, isn't real. He's a story. The children's faces fell, and he heard several small gasps of disappointment. But, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, the idea that Santa represents is real. The promise he makes is real. And, sometimes, when children need it most, that promise finds a way to keep itself. He turned back to the children, and his next words were spoken with the conviction of a man who had just decided to bet everything on a single hand. Santa isn't real, he said clearly. But, Christmas magic is. And, I promise you this, on Christmas morning, you will not be forgotten. The room erupted as guards moved forward and alarms began to sound. Marcus had just made a promise he had no idea how to keep, in front of witnesses who would make sure the Zalani knew exactly what he'd said. But, as he was dragged away, he saw something in those children's eyes that made it all worthwhile. They were looking at him like he might just be crazy enough to make the impossible happen. And, maybe, just maybe, he was the punishment cells beneath Detention Center Alpha 7 were designed to break minds through sensory deprivation. Marcus had been suspended in the darkness for 6 hours when the door finally opened, flooding his retinas with painful light. Commander Vexthal stood silhouetted in the doorway, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the harsh illumination like a prism of anger. You fool, the alien hissed, his mandibles clicking rapidly. Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus said nothing as the restraints released him, letting him drop to the metal floor. His legs nearly gave out, but he forced himself to stand. Around him, the other members of his squad were being released from their own cells, each one looking worse for wear but still defiant. The children, Vexthal continued, beginning to pace, have become completely unmanageable. They're singing human songs, fashioning more decorations, and, worst of all, they're convincing children from other sectors to join them. The infection is spreading. Infection? Corporal Kim spat, flexing her malfunctioning prosthetic. You mean hope? The commander's colors shifted to a dangerous red. I mean rebellion. 17 different species of children are now refusing to work, refusing to cooperate, and demanding to know when Santa Claus is coming. They believe you, human. Marcus straightened up, meeting the alien's compound gaze. Maybe they should. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then, Vexthal began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass that sent chills down every human spine in the room. You think you can keep this promise? The commander asked. You think you can play Santa Claus for a few dozen alien children while locked in my prison? I think, Marcus said carefully, that you're more afraid of what those children represent than you want to admit. Vexthal stopped laughing abruptly. Explain. You've conquered dozens of worlds, broken hundreds of species, but you've never encountered anything quite like human Christmas spirit, have you? It's not just hope, it's infectious hope. It spreads from person to person, from species to species, until entire populations start believing that impossible things might be possible. The alien commander's exoskeleton began to vibrate with suppressed rage. Christmas is a lie. Santa Claus is a myth. Gift-giving is an irrational waste of resources. And, yet, Private Johnson interjected, you're terrified that a bunch of kids might make it real anyway. Marcus watched Vexthal's color shift through several alarming shades before settling on a cold, calculating blue. Very well, human. You want to play games? Here are the rules. You have until December 25th by your calendar to prove that Santa Claus is real. If you succeed in delivering Christmas gifts to every child in this facility, I will personally ensure they receive better treatment. The catch was coming. Marcus could sense it hanging in the air like a blade waiting to fall. But, when you fail, Vexthal continued, when Christmas morning comes and those children wake up to empty hands and broken promises, you will personally tell each one that you lied. That Santa is not real, that Christmas is meaningless, and that hope is a cruel joke humans play on the innocent. And, if I refuse? Then, the children go to the processing centers immediately. Marcus looked around at his squad. Every face reflected the same grim determination. They'd already lost everything that mattered to them except their humanity. Now they had a chance to prove that being human meant something. Deal, Marcus said. Vexthal's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. Excellent. You have 22 days. I look forward to watching you break their hearts. After the commander left, the humans were returned to their cell block. But, something had changed. Word of Marcus's promise had spread through the facility's communication networks, carried by guards who thought they were sharing a joke. Now every prisoner in the complex knew that the humans had committed to the impossible. Marcus, Kim said quietly once they were alone, please tell me you have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan, he replied, settling onto his bunk. But, it's going to require help from people we've never met and cooperation from prisoners we can't trust. Over the next few hours, Marcus outlined his strategy. It was audacious, ridiculous, and completely insane. It was also the most human thing any of them had attempted since their capture. The first phase began the next morning during work detail. The humans had been assigned to maintenance duties in the facility's lower levels, ostensibly to keep them away from the children. What the Zolani didn't realize was that this gave them access to the one place in the entire complex where miracles might be possible, the recycling and fabrication center. The facility processed waste from 12 different detention centers, sorting materials for reuse in Zolani manufacturing. Mountains of discarded items flowed through conveyor systems, most destined for molecular breakdown and reconstitution. But some things fell through the cracks, especially items the Zolani didn't understand or consider valuable. There, whispered Private Chen, pointing to a collection bin marked for organic waste disposal. Do you see it? Marcus looked where she was pointing and felt his heart skip. Buried under layers of food scraps and biodegradable packaging was something that shouldn't exist in a Zolani facility, a stuffed animal. It was dirty, missing one eye, and barely recognizable as what had once been a teddy bear. But it was a toy, made with love for some child on some world that no longer existed. How did this get here? Asked Johnson. Doesn't matter, Marcus replied, carefully extracting the toy while keeping watch for guards. What matters is that if one toy survived, others might have too. They began searching more carefully, using their work assignments as cover for a scavenger hunt that would have made any Earth Mall Santa proud. In the next 3 hours, they found a small doll with tangled hair, a set of building blocks made from an unknown polymer, a music box that no longer played, and, most surprisingly, a book of children's stories written in a script none of them could read. But finding toys was only the first challenge. They also needed materials to make new ones, tools to work with, and, most importantly, a way to get everything to the children without being caught. The answer came from an unexpected source: the other prisoners. Word of the humans' impossible mission had spread beyond the detention centers to the adult population. Aliens who had been conquered, broken, and enslaved began to remember what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. They started making contact through the complex network of work details, meal distributions, and prisoner transfers that connected the various facilities. The first ally was Dr. Kethmar, a Kytherian scientist who had been assigned to the fabrication center's technical maintenance crew. She approached Marcus during the evening meal period, her silver eyes reflecting a hope he hadn't seen in any adult alien since the conquest. "My daughter," she said simply. "Mira. She's in the youth facility." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been speaking to someone's mother without knowing it. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "No," Kethmar interrupted. "You don't understand. You gave her something I thought was lost forever. She believes again. She sings again. For the first time since we were captured, she acts like a child instead of a prisoner." The doctor leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I can help you. The fabrication center has molecular assemblers capable of creating complex structures. If you can provide me with designs and materials, I can manufacture toys that would fool anyone into thinking they came from the best workshops in the galaxy." "Why would you risk this?" Marcus asked. "If we're caught, if you fail, they'll process the children anyway," Kethmar replied. "At least this way, they'll have a few weeks of hope first." More allies emerged over the following days. A Vaxillian engineer offered access to power tools and workspace. A Threen artist volunteered to paint and decorate whatever they could create. Most surprisingly, 3 human prisoners from other facilities managed to get themselves transferred to work details that would allow them to contribute. The underground network grew organically, powered by the same force that had driven humans to celebrate Christmas for thousands of years: the need to bring joy to children, regardless of the cost. Within a week, they had established a secret workshop in an abandoned section of the recycling center. It was hidden behind false walls that the engineer had constructed during routine maintenance, accessible only through a ventilation shaft that required crawling for 50 meters through darkness. But having a workshop was meaningless without the most important component: someone who actually knew how to make toys. That's when they found Elena Vasquez. Elena had been a toy designer on New Geneva, specializing in educational playthings that helped children learn while having fun. She'd been captured during the evacuation of the primary schools and had spent months in a different facility before being transferred as part of a labor exchange. When Marcus first met her in the workshop, she was crying over the broken teddy bear they'd found in the waste stream. "I made this," she whispered, turning the damaged toy over in her hands. 3 years ago, for the Children's Hospital charity drive. I remember sewing each seam, picking out the fabric pattern." She looked up at Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "How many children had this before it ended up in alien garbage?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "But I know we can make sure it matters again." Elena nodded, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders. "What do you need?" "Magic," Marcus replied. "Pure, concentrated Christmas magic." "Can you help us make that?" For the first time since they'd met, Elena smiled. "Honey, I've been making Christmas magic for 20 years. The only difference is now we're doing it to save the universe." The transformation of their secret workshop began immediately. Elena took charge of design and production, drawing on her years of experience to create toys that would appeal to children of different species. She worked with Dr. Kethmar to understand alien physiology and cultural preferences, ensuring that each gift would be both safe and meaningful. The Vaxillian engineer, whose name was Grixinael, proved invaluable in creating tools and mechanical components. His species had naturally dexterous hands and an intuitive understanding of how things fit together. Within days, he had assembled a complete toy-making operation using nothing but salvaged materials and improvised tools. The Threen artist, Yilvara, brought color and beauty to everything they created. Her people saw in spectrums beyond human vision, and she could combine pigments in ways that created paint colors that seemed to glow with their own inner light. But, perhaps the most important contributor was someone none of them had expected: the children themselves. It started when Mira managed to slip a note to her mother during a carefully orchestrated accidental meeting in a corridor. The note was written in the Kytherian child script that adults often couldn't decipher, but Dr. Kethmar translated it for the group that evening. "She wants to know if Santa needs help," Kethmar reported. "She says the children have been making lists of what everyone wants, and they've figured out how to weave decorations from their meal fibers." Marcus felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that Santa always needs help from children who believe," the doctor replied. "And that the most important gift anyone can give is hope." The next day, more notes arrived through the prisoner network. Children from a dozen different species had begun contributing to the project in their own ways. They created detailed drawings of toys they wanted, wove decorations from scraps of fabric and food packaging, and even composed songs about Christmas in languages their parents had thought were forgotten. Most importantly, they began to believe not just in Santa, but in themselves. The youth facilities guards reported a dramatic change in behavior. The children were still refusing to cooperate with certain orders, but they were also cleaning their quarters without being asked, sharing their meager food rations with younger children, and comforting newcomers who arrived frightened and alone. "They're acting like Christmas elves," Elena observed one evening as she worked on a particularly complex doll that could sing lullabies in 7 languages. "They understand that Christmas magic isn't just about receiving, it's about giving." Marcus nodded, watching the mixed species of adults working together in their impossible workshop. Aliens who had never heard of Christmas before were staying up all night to hand-carve wooden toys. Prisoners who had given up hope months ago were using their technical skills to create electronic games and musical instruments. "I think they're teaching us as much as we're teaching them," he said. As December progressed, their operation expanded beyond anything Marcus had originally imagined. The workshop now operated in 3 shifts, with volunteers from 5 different species contributing according to their abilities. They had established supply lines that brought in materials from across the facility complex, and even developed a communication network that allowed them to coordinate with sympathizers in other detention centers. But, with expansion came risk. The more people who knew about the project, the greater the chance of discovery. And, with each passing day, Commander Vexthal's surveillance grew more intense. The first real scare came on December 15, when a Zolani security patrol nearly discovered their supply cache in the recycling center. Only quick thinking from Grix and Ale, who created a distraction by accidentally damaging some equipment, prevented a catastrophe. "We're running out of time," Elena warned that night as they counted their inventory. "We have toys for maybe half the children, and we still don't have a way to actually deliver them." Marcus had been thinking about the delivery problem for weeks. Getting hundreds of toys into a heavily guarded facility on Christmas morning seemed impossible. But then, he remembered something his grandmother had told him as a child: the best Christmas magic happens when people aren't looking for it. "We don't sneak the toys in," he said suddenly. "We hide them in plain sight." The others looked at him with confusion, so Marcus continued. "What if the toys are already in the facility? What if they've been there all along, waiting for the right moment?" It was Dr. Kethmar who understood first. "The maintenance systems," she whispered. "Every room in the youth facility has access panels for environmental controls, waste disposal, and emergency supplies." "Exactly," Marcus grinned. "We don't break into their rooms on Christmas morning. We put the gifts inside the walls weeks ahead of time, with remote triggers that will release them exactly when we want." Yilvera's colors shifted to an excited purple. "But, how do we get into the walls without being detected?" Marcus's grin widened. "Who says we haven't already been detected? We've been doing maintenance work in those areas for weeks. The guards expect to see us there." It was audacious, dangerous, and absolutely insane. It was also perfectly human. "We'll need to be incredibly careful," Elena warned. "If even one gift is discovered early, then we make sure that doesn't happen," Marcus interrupted. "We build them to look like standard maintenance equipment until they're activated." We install them in places where no guard would think to look. And we pray that Christmas magic is real enough to cover the gaps in our planning. As December 20th arrived, their impossible workshop had achieved something that would have made any Earth toy store proud. Hundreds of handmade gifts sat ready for distribution, each one crafted with love and hope by people who had every reason to give up but chose to believe instead. The final phase of their plan was about to begin. And, somewhere in the youth facility, dozens of alien children were counting down the days until they would discover whether promises could really come true. At December 24th dawned gray and cold in Detention Center Alpha 7, just like every other day since the conquest. But something invisible had changed in the air, a tension that even the Zolani guards could feel. In the youth facility, children of 17 different species went through their daily routines with an electric anticipation that made their alien overseers nervous. Marcus Jen stood at his cell window, watching the artificial snow fall outside while mentally reviewing their plan for the 1000th time. In 18 hours, they would either pull off the greatest Christmas miracle in galactic history, or fail so spectacularly that it would crush the spirits of every child who had dared to believe. "You're making me nervous," Corporal Kim said from her bunk. "And, considering I've been shot at by professional soldiers, that's saying something." "Sorry," Marcus replied, turning away from the window. "Just thinking about all the things that could go wrong." "Don't," Elena Vasquez said firmly from across the cell. The toy designer had been transferred to their block 3 days earlier under the pretense of a work detail reassignment. "We've planned for every contingency we can think of. Now we have to trust that we've done enough." Private Johnson looked up from the small device he'd been tinkering with. "The remote triggers are all calibrated and ready." Dr. Kethmar confirmed that the timing circuits will activate simultaneously at 0600 hours tomorrow morning. "And the gifts are definitely in place?" Marcus asked. "Every single one," Elena confirmed. Hidden in maintenance panels throughout the youth facility. 347 individual presents, each one designed specifically for the child who will receive it. The numbers still amazed Marcus. What had started as a desperate promise to a handful of alien children had grown into an operation involving more than 100 prisoners from across the facility complex. They had created everything from simple stuffed animals to complex electronic games, all crafted from salvaged materials and powered by pure determination. "What about the special items?" Kim asked. Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of joy Marcus had seen from her since they'd met. "Myra's new teddy bear is exactly where it needs to be, along with the music box we rebuilt. The Esikatar boy will get his action figures, and the little Vaxilian girl will find the art supplies she's been dreaming about." Each gift had been personalized based on intelligence gathered through the note-passing network. The children had unknowingly provided detailed wish lists through their conversations with sympathetic adults, and the workshop had done their best to fulfill every request. But the toys were only part of the plan. The real magic would come from the delivery system itself. "Explain the sequence one more time," Marcus requested. Johnson set down his work and pulled up a hand-drawn schematic. At exactly 6 a.m., the first wave of triggers will activate in the youngest children's quarters. The wall panels will slide open, and gifts will appear to materialize out of thin air. Music boxes will start playing Christmas carols, lights will begin twinkling, and decorations will unfold automatically. He pointed to different sections of the drawing. 5 minutes later, the second wave activates in the older children's areas. By 6:15, every child in the facility will have woken up to find their rooms transformed into Christmas wonderlands. "And the guards?" Marcus asked. "We'll be dealing with what appears to be a massive system malfunction," Elena grinned. "Dr. Kethmar has programmed the environmental controls to create harmless but dramatic light shows throughout the facility. The guards will be too busy trying to figure out what's wrong with their equipment to notice that the malfunctions are actually producing Christmas displays." It was beautiful in its simplicity. The Zolani were so focused on preventing rebellion and escape that they would never suspect their prisoners of attempting something as seemingly harmless as a Christmas celebration. By the time they realized what was happening, hundreds of children would already be experiencing the magic of Christmas morning. "There's something else," Kim said quietly. "Something we haven't talked about yet." Marcus looked at her, knowing what she was going to say. "Commander Vexthal will be watching," she continued. "He's expecting us to fail, and, when we don't, he's going to be furious. This won't end with Christmas morning." The cell fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They had all known from the beginning that success would bring consequences. The Zilani didn't tolerate defiance, especially not the kind of spectacular defiance they were about to attempt. "I know," Marcus said finally. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, we focus on keeping our promise." As evening approached, word spread through the prisoner network that this would be the last night. Tomorrow, everything would change. Children who had been taught that hope was a lie would wake up to proof that miracles were real. Adults who had forgotten how to dream would see their children's faces light up with wonder. In the secret workshop, the final preparations were underway. Grix NAL was conducting last-minute tests on the remote activation systems, while Yelvara added finishing touches to hand-painted decorations. Dr. Kethmar reviewed the environmental control programming one final time, ensuring that every light show and sound effect would trigger at precisely the right moment. But, perhaps the most important preparation was taking place in the youth facility itself, where the children were having their own Christmas Eve. Mira stood in the center of the common room, leading a mixed group of species in what had become their nightly tradition, the Christmas story. She had learned it from fragments shared by human prisoners, and had embellished it with details that reflected her own hopes and dreams. And Santa's workshop, she said in her clear, young voice, isn't just at the North Pole. It's everywhere that people care about children. It's in the hearts of everyone who believes that love is stronger than fear. The other children listened with rapt attention, their eyes shining with anticipation. Some of the older ones had begun to doubt as the day progressed, wondering if the guards might be right about Santa being just a story. But Myra's faith was unshakable. "How do you know he'll really come?" asked Zektor, a young Isikatar whose reptilian features couldn't hide his anxiety. "The guards keep saying he's not real." Mira smiled, holding up the small doll she'd carried since her capture. "Because someone promised. And promises matter. When someone makes a promise to a child and really means it, the universe finds a way to make it true." Unknown to the children, their conversation was being monitored by Commander Vexthal himself. The alien sat in his command center, watching multiple screens that showed different angles of the youth facility. His compound eyes tracked every movement, every expression, looking for signs that the children were beginning to lose faith. Instead, he saw something that made his exoskeleton vibrate with frustration. The children weren't just believing in Santa, they were planning to help him. Over the past week, they had been working together to create their own gifts for each other. Using scraps of cloth, bits of food packaging, and their own artistic abilities, the young prisoners had fashioned small tokens of friendship and love. They planned to exchange these homemade presents regardless of whether Santa arrived, proving that they had internalized the most important lesson of Christmas: giving was as important as receiving. "Sir," one of his subordinates reported, "the human prisoners in detention center Alpha 7 appear to be conducting some sort of ceremony." Vexthal switched his attention to the screens showing Marcus Chan's cell block. The humans were gathered in a circle, holding hands and speaking in quiet voices. It looked like a prayer session, which was another human custom the Zilani found pointless but harmless. What the commander couldn't hear was the content of their conversation. "We've done everything we can," Marcus was saying. "In 6 hours, we'll find out if it was enough." "It will be," Elena said with conviction. "I can feel it. There's something in the air tonight, something that wasn't here yesterday." Kim nodded. "The children believe. Really, truly believe. And, somehow, that makes it feel possible." "You think belief is enough?" Johnson asked. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that belief is how impossible things become inevitable. We've all seen it happen before. Someone decides that something must be true, and they convince enough other people, and, suddenly, the universe rearranges itself to make it real." They spent the next hour sharing stories from their own childhoods, remembering Christmases when magic had seemed as real as gravity. They talked about the expressions on children's faces when they discovered that someone had listened to their wishes and cared enough to make them come true. But, mostly, they prepared themselves for the moment when they would either be heroes or heartbreakers. As midnight approached, the facility settled into its normal quiet routine. Guards conducted their regular patrols, security systems monitored for escape attempts, and most of the prisoners tried to sleep. But, in the secret workshop, a small group of volunteers was making final adjustments to their impossible plan. "Test sequence one more time," Dr. Kethmar whispered into her communicator. Throughout the youth facility, tiny lights flickered briefly in hidden corners as the activation systems confirmed their readiness. Music boxes hummed silent notes, mechanical toys twitched into temporary life, and decorations unfolded fractionally before retracting to await their cue. "All systems green," came the response from Grix and Ale. "Christmas magic is locked and loaded." Dr. Kethmar allowed herself a small smile. "Santa's sleigh is ready for takeoff." In the youth facility, Mira lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the breathing of the other children around her. She wasn't the only one having trouble sleeping. Excitement and nervousness had combined to make rest impossible for most of the young prisoners. "Mira," whispered her bunkmate, a young three named Pixare whose color-changing skin was cycling through nervous purples and blues. "What if the guards are right? What if Santa really isn't real?" The little Kytherian girl turned to face her friend, her silver eyes reflecting what little light filtered through the barred windows. "Then, we'll still have each other. And we'll still have the gifts we made for everyone. And we'll still remember that for a few weeks, we believed in something wonderful." She paused, thinking about the human soldier who had made this all possible. And maybe that's what Santa really is. Not a person, but an idea. The idea that when children need hope the most, someone will find a way to give it to them. Pixare's skin shifted to a more peaceful blue. "I like that idea." "Me too," Mira whispered, finally, feeling sleep begin to claim her. "Me too." Back in Detention Center Alpha 7, Marcus Chen was having his own conversation with insomnia. He stood at the cell window, watching the artificial snow continue its endless fall. In 5 hours, 347 alien children would wake up to discover whether promises could really come true. "Having second thoughts?" Elena asked softly from behind him. "Third and fourth thoughts," Marcus admitted. "What we're about to do, it's either the most beautiful thing ever attempted in this place, or the cruelest." "It's both," Elena said, joining him at the window. "That's what makes it so perfectly human." Marcus looked at her with surprise. "Both? Think about it," she continued. "We're giving these children one perfect Christmas morning. One moment of pure joy and wonder. But what happens after that? They're still prisoners. They're still at the mercy of the Zilani. We can't save them from their circumstances." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "So you think we're wrong to do this?" "No," Elena said firmly. "I think we're absolutely right to do this. Because hope isn't about changing everything forever. It's about proving that change is possible. Those children will carry this Christmas with them for the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives might be. They'll remember that once upon a time, impossible things happened. And, maybe, someday, they'll make impossible things happen for someone else." She smiled, and, in the dim light, she looked almost ethereal. "That's what Christmas magic really is, Marcus. It's not about the presents or the decorations or even Santa Claus. It's about the idea that kindness can cross any barrier, that love can survive any hardship, and that sometimes, when children need it most, adults will risk everything to give them a reason to believe." Marcus nodded, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. "And if the Zilani punish us for this? Then, we'll face that together, knowing we did something that mattered." As the clock in the facility's central tower chimed 3 a.m., both the youth facility and the detention center had finally settled into an uneasy quiet. Children dozed fitfully, dreams filled with visions of wrapped packages and magical visitors. Adults checked and double-checked their equipment, making sure that everything would work perfectly when the moment came. In his command center, Commander Vexthal reviewed security footage from the past month, looking for any sign of how the humans might be planning to attempt their impossible promise. He found evidence of increased maintenance activity, more prisoner conversations, and a general improvement in morale that he found deeply suspicious. But he found no concrete evidence of any escape plan or rebellion. Whatever the humans were planning, they had been remarkably careful to hide it. Perhaps, he mused to his aide, they really are deluded enough to believe they can make Christmas magic real through pure wishful thinking. Sir, the aide responded, confused by the alien concept. Nothing, Vexthal replied. Maintain normal patrols. In 3 hours, we'll watch these humans learn that reality doesn't care about their fantasies. But, as 4 a.m. became 5 a.m., something began to change in the facility's atmosphere. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible shift in the electromagnetic fields generated by the hidden devices. Then, came tiny vibrations as mechanical systems prepared for activation. Finally, the faintest whisper of music began to emanate from concealed speakers throughout the youth facility. At 5:30 a.m., the first guard noticed that something was wrong. Control, this is Patrol 7. I'm seeing some unusual readings on the environmental monitoring station in Sector C. Specify unusual, came the response. Temperature fluctuations, minor power irregularities, and, sir, this is going to sound strange, but I think I'm hearing music. In the command center, alarm bells began ringing as similar reports came in from across the facility. Equipment that had worked perfectly for months was suddenly showing signs of malfunction. But these weren't random failures, they were coordinated, purposeful, and somehow beautiful. Commander Vexthal stared at his status boards as one by one, systems throughout the youth facility began reporting anomalies. Power surges, audio irregularities, atmospheric fluctuations, and, most concerning of all, unauthorized access to environmental controls. Sir, his communications officer reported, the anomalies appear to be following some sort of pattern. Almost like a countdown sequence. Vexthal's compound eyes narrowed as he realized what was happening. The humans hadn't been planning an escape or a rebellion. They had been planning something far more dangerous. They were about to prove that hope could triumph over despair. Lock down the youth facility, he ordered. Now. But it was too late. At exactly 6 a.m. on December 25, 347 hidden devices activated simultaneously throughout the youth facility. Wall panels slid open to reveal wrapped packages. Light displays burst into brilliant life. Music began playing from every hidden speaker. And, in room after room, alien children woke up to discover that Christmas morning had come to find them. In the central common room, Mira sat up in her bed to find her quarters transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights spelled out Merry Christmas in letters 10 feet tall. Her broken teddy bear had been replaced by a new one, perfectly crafted and wearing a small red hat. Next to it sat a music box that played a lullaby in her native language, one she hadn't heard since before the conquest. But, most importantly, scattered around the room were gifts for every child, not just toys and games, but books in their native languages, art supplies, musical instruments, and dozens of other items that spoke directly to each young heart. Santa came, she whispered, and then, louder, Santa came. Her shout woke the other children, and, within moments, the entire facility erupted in squeals of delight, laughter, and wonder. Children of 17 different species were experiencing their first Christmas morning, and it was everything their human protectors had promised it would be. In Detention Center Alpha 7, Marcus Chen pressed his face against his cell window and listened to the distant sounds of joy echoing across the complex. Alarms were ringing, guards were shouting orders, and Commander Vexthal was probably having the equivalent of an alien heart attack. But, underneath it all, clear and unmistakable, was the sound of children laughing. We did it, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. We actually did it. Ho ho ho, Johnson said quietly, and, for the first time in months, Marcus Chen laughed out loud. Christmas had come to the darkest corner of the galaxy, and, for one perfect morning, miracles were real. The chaos in the youth facility lasted exactly 47 minutes before Commander Vexthal managed to restore order. By then, 347 children had experienced something that would change the course of galactic history. They had learned that impossible promises could come true. Marcus Chen watched from his cell window as squads of Zilani guards rushed between buildings, their crystalline exoskeletons flashing with agitated colors. Emergency vehicles arrived to investigate what the aliens assumed was a massive system malfunction. Technical crews swarmed over the facility, trying to understand how their security systems had been compromised so thoroughly. But, in all their frantic activity, the Zalani missed the most important thing that was happening. The children weren't just celebrating Christmas, they were teaching it to others. "Report," Vexthal demanded as he strode into the youth facility's central control room. Warden Clickstar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Sir, we've confiscated all the unauthorized items and restored normal lighting conditions. The children have been returned to their quarters, and we're conducting interrogations to determine how the contraband entered the facility." "And their current state of mind?" "That's complicated, sir." Vexthal's colors shifted to a dangerous red. "Explain." "They're not behaving as we expected. Usually, when we remove something the children value, they become depressed or angry. But these younglings are different. They're acting as if the gifts were never the important part." The warden activated a wall screen showing feeds from various quarters throughout the facility. Instead of the broken spirits Vexthal expected to see, he observed children engaged in activities that made no logical sense. They were sharing their meager food rations more generously than usual, comforting newcomers who arrived frightened and alone, and, most disturbing of all, singing. "What are they singing?" the commander asked. "Human songs, sir. Christmas carols, they call them. But the words are changing as they spread from one species to another. The children are adapting the melodies to their own languages and adding verses about hope, kindness, and..." Clickstar paused uncomfortably. "Love." Vexthal studied the screens more carefully. In one room, a young Isikatar was using pieces of his confiscated building set to teach geometry to smaller children. In another, a Threen girl had organized a drawing competition using art supplies she'd somehow hidden from the confiscation teams. Most remarkably, in the central common room, Mira was leading a group that included children from 8 different species in what appeared to be a discussion about how to make Christmas happen for children in other facilities. "They're planning to spread it," Vexthal realized with growing alarm. "Sir? The infection. They want to share what they experienced with others." The commander's exoskeleton began to vibrate with suppressed rage. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. They don't understand that it was all fake, they think they witnessed genuine magic." Before Clickstar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, we're receiving reports from detention centers Beta 3, Gamma 7, and Delta 2. The adult prisoners are refusing work assignments and demanding to speak with their children." Vexthal's colors cycled through several alarming shades before settling on a cold, calculating blue. "Put me through to the human prisoners." When Marcus appeared on the communication screen, flanked by his fellow soldiers in their shared cell, he looked remarkably calm for someone who had just committed the most audacious act of defiance in the facility's history. "Commander," Marcus said politely. "I trust you had an eventful morning." "You kept your promise," Vexthal admitted, his voice filled with grudging respect and barely contained fury. "The children received their gifts. But now you face the consequences." "We understood the consequences from the beginning," Marcus replied. "But I think you're underestimating yours." "Explain." Marcus gestured toward the screen showing the youth facility. "Those children just learned something that's going to be very difficult for you to control. They learned that when adults promise to protect them, sometimes those promises are actually kept. They learned that hope isn't just wishful thinking, it's a force that can reshape reality when enough people believe in it." Vexthal leaned closer to the screen. "And you think this matters because..." "Because hope is contagious," Elena Vasquez interjected, moving into view. "And children are the best vectors for spreading it." As if to prove her point, new alarms began sounding. Reports flooded in from facilities across the detention complex. Adult prisoners who had been compliant for months were suddenly demanding information about their children. Work crews were refusing assignments until they could confirm their families were safe. Most concerning of all, alien prisoners who had never heard of Christmas before were asking detailed questions about the holiday and its traditions. You see, Marcus continued, we didn't just give those children toys. We gave them proof that the universe still contains kindness. That there are still people willing to risk everything to make children smile. And, children, Commander, are terrible at keeping that kind of secret. The truth of his words became apparent over the following hours. Despite the Zelani's attempts to isolate the youth facility, word of Christmas morning spread through the prisoner network like wildfire. The story grew and evolved with each telling, becoming something larger than the original event. Parents across the detention complex learned that their children had experienced something wonderful. Alien species who had never celebrated holidays began asking about Christmas traditions. Most importantly, prisoners who had given up hope months ago suddenly remembered what it felt like to believe in the impossible. Dr. Kethmar, back in the fabrication center, found herself surrounded by aliens desperate to understand what had happened to their children. She described Myra's reaction to finding her Christmas gifts, and watched as hardened warriors began to weep at the thought of their younglings experiencing joy. Can we do it again? Asked a Vaxillian engineer whose daughter had been among the recipients. Can we make more Christmas mornings happen? Christmas isn't about the presents, Dr. Kethmar explained, echoing what she had learned from the humans. It's about the promise. The promise that children matter enough for adults to risk everything to protect them. The promise that kindness can survive even in the darkest places. The promise that love is stronger than fear. Within hours, the concept was spreading beyond the detention complex. Guard rotations carried stories back to their homes, where alien families began asking questions about human customs and the meaning of hope. Maintenance crews who had witnessed the Christmas morning setup started incorporating small acts of kindness into their daily routines. But, perhaps the most significant spread was happening in the youth facility itself, where Mira had become an unofficial ambassador for Christmas spirit. Tell us again about Santa's workshop, requested Zektor during their evening gathering. Mira, now holding a carefully hidden piece of her new teddy bear's stuffing that she'd saved from the confiscation, smiled with the wisdom of a child who had seen miracles. Santa's workshop isn't just one place. It's everywhere that people care about children. It's in the hearts of everyone who believes that love is stronger than fear. She looked around at the diverse group of young faces surrounding her. The human soldier told us that Santa isn't real, but Christmas magic is. And I think Christmas magic is when people decide that children deserve to be happy, no matter what. A small Threen boy raised his hand. But what if there are children in other places who don't know about Christmas? Children who are sad and scared and think no one cares about them? Myra's silver eyes shone with determination. Then, we have to find a way to tell them. We have to share the magic. How? Asked several voices at once. I don't know yet, Mira admitted. But the humans found a way to bring Christmas to us when everyone said it was impossible. Maybe we can find a way to bring it to others. Unknown to the children, their conversation was being monitored not just by Warden Clickstar, but by sympathetic guards who had been moved by what they'd witnessed that morning. These guards began carrying the children's words to other facilities, other worlds, other corners of the Zelani Empire where hope had been systematically eliminated. The response was immediate and unprecedented. On Zirian 4, alien prisoners began fashioning crude decorations from work materials. On Kadesh Prime, children who had never heard of Earth started asking their parents about the meaning of gift-giving. Most remarkably, on the industrial world of Thekmor, a group of enslaved Vaxillian families began planning their own version of Christmas, adapted to their cultural traditions but carrying the same message of hope and kindness. Commander Vexthal watched these reports flood in with growing alarm. What had started as a localized act of defiance was becoming something far more dangerous, a galaxy-wide awakening of the idea that oppression didn't have to be permanent. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving inquiries from 17 different sector commands. They want to know how to handle similar incidents in their territories. What's similar incidents? Prisoners attempting to organize gift exchanges, sir. Adults trying to create celebration days for their children. Some facilities are reporting that work efficiency has actually improved because prisoners believe their cooperation might earn better treatment for their families. Vexthal stared at the reports, trying to understand how a simple Christmas celebration had triggered such widespread changes in behavior. The Zelani had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same basic strategy: eliminate hope, crush resistance, and maintain order through fear. But, somehow, 23 human soldiers and 300 alien children had found a way to weaponize kindness. "Get me a direct line to High Command," he ordered. "We have a problem." But, even as Vexthal prepared his report, the changes were accelerating. In detention facilities across the galaxy, aliens were learning about Christmas traditions and adapting them to their own cultures. Gift-making workshops appeared in recycling centers. Children who had been taught that survival meant selfishness began sharing their possessions. Adults who had forgotten how to dream started planning ways to bring joy to the next generation. Most importantly, the story of Christmas morning was evolving into something larger than its human origins. Each species that encountered it added their own elements, their own understanding of what it meant to promise protection to children and actually keep that promise. On Zelthak 7, reptilian children began a tradition of sharing their shed scales with younger ones, believing these would bring luck and protection. On New Vaxia, insectoid families started creating geometric light patterns that spelled out messages of hope in their mathematical language. On dozens of worlds, the core message remained the same even as the details changed: children matter, kindness is real, and sometimes impossible things happen when enough people believe in them. 3 days after Christmas, Marcus Chen was summoned to Commander Vexthal's office. He expected to face punishment, possibly execution. Instead, he found the alien commander staring at wall screens showing prisoner facilities across the galaxy. "Do you understand what you've done?" Vexthal asked without turning around. Marcus studied the screens. They showed aliens of dozens of species engaged in activities that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Prisoners were cooperating with each other across species lines. Children were being treated with unprecedented kindness by guards who had been instructed to maintain strict discipline. Most remarkably, productivity in many facilities had actually increased as workers began to believe that good behavior might result in better conditions for their families. "We kept a promise to some children," Marcus said simply. "You started a revolution," Vexthal corrected. "A revolution based on the radical idea that kindness is possible even in the worst circumstances." The commander finally turned to face him. High Command is confused. They don't understand how gift-giving and singing could pose a threat to galactic security. They think this is a minor cultural contamination that will fade with time. Marcus met the alien's gaze steadily. "What do you think?" "I think," Vexthal said slowly, "that you've introduced a virus more dangerous than any biological weapon. You've shown oppressed populations that their oppressors can be outmaneuvered by hope. You've proven that promises made to children can reshape the fundamental nature of power itself." He paused, his colors shifting through patterns Marcus had never seen before. "The question is, what happens next?" Before Marcus could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The communications officer's voice echoed through the corridors: "All units, we have multiple reports of coordinated activities in sectors 7 through 12. Prisoners are refusing individual work assignments and demanding to work in family groups. They claim it's part of something called New Year's resolutions." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "I think that answers your question, Commander." Vexthal stared at him for a long moment, then activated his communication system. "This is Commander Vexthal to all units. Effective immediately, prisoner work assignments may be modified to accommodate family groups, provided productivity targets are maintained." The communications officer's voice crackled with confusion. "Sir, did you just authorize the prisoner's demands?" "I authorized a tactical adaptation to changing circumstances," Vexthal replied firmly. "Sometimes the best way to maintain control is to appear to give people what they want." After closing the channel, he turned back to Marcus. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that winning and losing might not be the right way to think about what's happening here." "Explain." Marcus gestured toward the screens showing increasingly cooperative prisoners and, surprisingly content children. Look at your facilities, Commander. Look at the productivity reports, the reduction in disciplinary incidents, the improvements in morale. Your prisoners aren't rebelling, they're investing. Investing in what? In the idea that good behavior might lead to better treatment. In the possibility that kindness can be mutual. In the hope that maybe, just maybe, this doesn't have to be permanent. Vexthal's exoskeleton vibrated with what Marcus had learned was deep thought. And, you believe this is preferable to our previous system? I believe, Marcus said, that happy prisoners work harder than miserable ones. I believe that children who feel loved grow up to be more productive adults. And, I believe that an empire built on hope is stronger than one built on fear. He paused, watching the alien commander process this information. The question isn't whether we've won or lost. The question is whether you're willing to try something that's never been attempted in galactic history, ruling through kindness instead of terror. As if summoned by his words, a new report appeared on one of the screens. It showed productivity statistics from the past 72 hours across multiple facilities. Despite the disruptions caused by Christmas celebrations and their aftermath, overall efficiency had increased by 18%. Disciplinary incidents had dropped by 47%. Most remarkably, requests for family communication privileges had increased by 300%, but, instead of causing security problems, these requests were leading to better prisoner cooperation. Vexthal studied the data with the intensity of a military strategist examining battlefield intelligence. These numbers suggest that prisoner happiness correlates with improved performance. Revolutionary concept, I know, Marcus said with carefully controlled irony. Don't mock me, human. I'm trying to understand something that challenges everything I was taught about power and control. The commander's colors shifted to patterns Marcus had never seen before. In Zilani society, strength is demonstrated through dominance. The ability to inflict suffering proves superiority. And, how's that working out for you? Vexthal gestured at the screen showing his facilities. These past 3 days have been more peaceful and productive than the previous 3 months. Children who were becoming increasingly difficult to manage are now helping to maintain order in their own quarters. Adults who required constant supervision are now requesting additional work assignments. He turned to Marcus with what might have been respect in his compound eyes. You've weaponized hope so effectively that your enemies are beginning to adopt your tactics voluntarily. Maybe that means we don't have to be enemies. The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither human nor Zilani had fully considered before this moment. The possibility that conquest might be less effective than cooperation. That fear might be a weaker foundation for order than trust. That children's laughter might be a more powerful force than military might. There's something else you need to know, Vexthal said finally. The reports from other facilities, they're not just about improved behavior. Prisoners are beginning to request information about their captors. They want to understand Zilani culture, learn our languages, find ways to communicate more effectively with guards and overseers. Marcus felt his heart skip. They're trying to connect. They're trying to bridge the gap between conquered and conqueror. They seem to believe that if they can understand us, they might be able to work with us instead of simply serving us. The implications were staggering. What had started as a promise to alien children was evolving into something that might reshape the entire relationship between the Zilani Empire and its subjected populations. Commander, Marcus said carefully, what if Christmas morning wasn't the end of something, but the beginning? Vexthal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up communications from across the galaxy, reports that showed similar patterns emerging on dozens of worlds. Conquered populations beginning to engage with their conquerors as individuals rather than faceless oppressors. Children teaching alien guards games from their homeworlds. Adults offering to share cultural knowledge and technical expertise in exchange for better conditions for their families. High Command won't understand this, the commander said finally. They'll see it as weakness, as dangerous contamination that needs to be eliminated. Will you tell them? Vexthal's colors shifted through several complex patterns before settling on a shade Marcus had never seen before. I'll tell them that the human Christmas experiment has resulted in unprecedented improvements in facility management and prisoner productivity. I'll recommend that similar cultural accommodation programs be implemented across the empire. Marcus stared at him in amazement. You're going to protect this? I'm going to protect results that benefit the empire, Vexthal corrected. If happiness and hope happen to be the most effective management tools we've discovered, then we'll use them. He paused, his exoskeleton reflecting the light from the screens in patterns that almost looked like Christmas decorations. But, understand this, human, you've changed something fundamental about how power works in this galaxy. The children who experienced Christmas morning will never forget it. The adults who witnessed it will never stop trying to recreate it. And, the guards and overseers who saw it happen will never be able to pretend that kindness is impossible. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what they had accomplished. So what happens next? Next, Vexthal said, we find out if an empire built on hope can be stronger than one built on fear. We discover whether conquered peoples can become willing partners instead of reluctant servants. We learn if Christmas magic is powerful enough to reshape the politics of an entire galaxy. He turned back to the screens, where children of dozens of species were playing games together, sharing stories, and planning ways to make tomorrow better than today. And, we hope, the alien commander added quietly, that we're strong enough to handle the consequences of what we've started. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood in what had once been Detention Center Alpha 7 and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The gray walls had been painted with murals created by children from 17 different species. The barred windows had been replaced with clear transparent steel that let in natural light. Most remarkably, the facility was no longer a prison at all, it had become the first interspecies cultural exchange center in galactic history. Hard to believe, isn't it? Elena Vasquez said, joining him in the central courtyard where alien children played games that combined human traditions with customs from across the galaxy. Marcus nodded, watching little Mira teach a group of mixed-species youngsters how to build snowmen from a new polymer compound that felt like snow but wouldn't melt. Sometimes I think I'm dreaming. If you are, don't wake up, said Dr. Kethmar, approaching with a data tablet full of reports. The quarterly statistics just came in from High Command. Productivity across the Empire is up 43%. Requests for voluntary relocation to work assignments are at an all-time high. Most importantly, the number of security incidents has dropped by 78%. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks following Christmas morning, the Zalani Empire had faced a crisis unlike anything in their military history. Their traditional methods of control had become increasingly ineffective as conquered populations began embracing hope instead of accepting despair. Rebellions hadn't increased, instead, something far more threatening had occurred. The conquered peoples had stopped seeing their captors as invincible overlords and started seeing them as individuals who might be capable of change. Commander Vexthal had been forced to make a choice: crush the growing movement toward cooperation or adapt to it. His decision to choose adaptation had sent shockwaves through the imperial hierarchy, leading to 6 months of political upheaval that had ultimately reshaped the entire structure of galactic governance. Any word from the High Command? Marcus asked. Dr. Kethmar's expression grew complicated. They're calling it the Christmas Protocols. Official imperial policy now requires all facilities to accommodate cultural celebrations and family interaction time. What started as one human's promise to alien children has become the foundation of a new approach to interspecies relations. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Zalani Empire, which had conquered half the galaxy through military force, was now maintaining its power through voluntary cooperation. Worlds that had been subjugated were becoming willing participants in an